Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
This is a double portion, so unless there's a leap year, in which case we add 4 Shabbatot to the calendar, unless it's a leap year, these parshiot are read together. So it is Tazria-Metzora. So Tazria is the affliction, and Metzora is the one who suffers from the affliction. Tazria and the Metzora. So those are our parshiot this morning. So Tazria is all about diagnosis and what one does to address the situation, which we'll talk about. And then Metzora is about how you bring a person back into regularity once they have been separated from the community due to Tzara'at, the disease Tzara'at. Okay, so we're going to begin Tazria, and again, we're talking about Tzara'at. That is I said I misspoke. Tzara'at is the affliction, and so we're going to begin looking at, okay, so what is it? It's not just Tzara'at, it is any kind of impurity. So remember, pure is regular. Life is regular. You go about your business. When there come certain situations and certain exposures, one's pure attachment to life is disrupted. And when that happens, one is rendered ritually impure, so not regular. So you don't go do the regular things, and you don't go to the sacred spaces, because you are, and we're going to look at Yitz Greenberg's interpretation of this morning. According to Yitz Greenberg, because you have been exposed to death, and therefore, out of respect for that, one doesn't continue as one does when one is just mostly relating to life and to purity. So what are some of the things, we're going to see some of the things that disrupt regularity. God says to Moshe, talk to the Israelite people. When a woman at childbirth bears a male, she shall be impure 7 days. She shall be impure as at the time of her condition of menstrual separation. Childbirth renders one ritually impure because it is a dysregulator. If you agree with people like Yitz Greenberg, it's because it introduces contact with death. Both giving birth brought women very close to the possibility of death in the ancient world, and the infant, right? Many, many, many infants died. So both the woman and the infant are exposed to contact with death. In the case of a male, we're told that when she is to be impure, when she has a male child, it's the same as when she menstruates. Because when she menstruates, remember, she's ritually impure. She has had contact with death by an egg not being fertilized and dying. Possibly also that someone who bleeds for 7 days and doesn't die was considered sort of magical. We know this was true in many cultures around the ancient world. Possibly this is a remnant of that for the Israelites. On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. She shall remain in a state of blood purification for 33 days. She shall not touch any consecrated thing, nor enter the sanctuary until her period of purification is completed. So I think we too often see this in a binary sense. You're either in a state of ritual purity or impurity. And that's true. Like if you're in a state of impurity, you don't touch certain things that are kodesh, that are pure, that are set aside for holy purposes. But it's a process. It's not like she's like sent to Arizona and stays there and then comes back, right? Like she's still part of regular life. She's just in a different state and therefore has certain limitations about where she can go and what she can do ritually. But there's a process of purification that's ongoing until the 30 days is up. So if you think about, all right, if you're going to have surgery, you don't take ibuprofen or any NSAIDs for 5 to 7 days before the thing because you don't want your blood to be that thin. It's the same kind of idea that it's not it's not that there's something wrong with your blood. It's that because you're about to have surgery, you need to change your regular way of dealing with your body. And it's the same here, except the other way, right? Because something has happened, because birth has happened, she now has to deal with her body in a different way, because that's just how it is. If she bears a female, she shall be impure 2 weeks as during her menstruation, and she shall remain in a state of blood purification for 60 days. So it's the same actual impurity for both, but she remains in the process of becoming tahor, of becoming pure, twice as long for a girl, almost twice as long, possibly because girls will menstruate. So they will be experiencing monthly disruption of a ritual state of purity, and girls will give birth. So it makes some sort of sense if that's the explanation we're going with, contact with death, then she's giving birth to a child who will do that for the rest of her life until she stops menstruating and stops bearing children. That's a long time. So possibly that explains the longer period of purification. On the completion of her period of purification for either son or daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a lamb for a burnt offering and a pigeon or a turtle dove for a purgation offering. Right, so she's bringing korbanot, right, things that will draw her close again to purity and the divine and it to her. Yes, Pam.
I get the Olah offering, but why a chatat? Why a sin offering?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. There isn't really a great answer that I have found, except in that chatat is not always because one did something wrong. Chatat is sometimes you're bringing an offering for expiation of something, so that her giving birth has rendered her someone that needs expiation, but it's not because she did something wrong, because we know that childbirth is the greatest thing she can possibly do in affirming life and risking her own life. But I don't have a great answer. But you know what? I'll look it up and I'll spend more time with it. So it's going to be made on her behalf, and there's arrangements made for if she can't afford a more expensive offering, which is important, I think, right? That it's made clear that someone who can't afford the choicest offering, there's arrangements made for her to bring something she can afford. All right, so now we get into this whole business of tzara'at. When a person has on their skin a swelling, a rash, or a discoloration, and it develops into a scaly affection on their skin, it shall be reported to Aaron the priest or to one of his sons the priests. The priest shall examine the affection on the skin. If hair in the affected patch has turned white and the affection appears to be deeper than the skin, it is leprous affection. When the priest sees it, he shall pronounce the person impure. But if it is a white discoloration on the skin that does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair in it has not turned white, the priest shall isolate the affected person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall conduct an examination, and if the affection has remained unchanged in color, and the disease has not spread on the skin, the priest shall isolate them for another 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall again conduct an examination. If the affection has faded and has not spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce the person pure. It is a rash. That person, after washing their clothes, shall be pure. But if the rash should spread on the skin after they have been seen by the priest and pronounced pure, that person shall again report to the priest. And if the priest sees that the rash has spread, the priest shall pronounce them impure. Tzara'at he. It is tzara'at. When a person has a scaly affection, it shall be reported to the priest. And if the priest finds on the skin a white swelling that has turned some hair white, if the I don't know where I am. If the discoloration remains stationary, not having spread, it is the scar of the inflammation. The priest shall pronounce them pure. When one's skin sustains a burn by fire and the patch from the burn is a discoloration, either white streaked with red or white, the priest shall examine it. If some hair has turned white in the discoloration, which itself appears to go deeper than the skin, it is tzara'at that is broken out in the burn. The priest shall pronounce the person impure. It is tzara'at. But if the priest finds that there is no white hair in the discoloration and that it is not lower than the rest of the skin and it is faded, the priest shall isolate them for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall conduct an examination. If it has spread in the skin, the priest shall pronounce them impure. It is tzara'at. But if the discoloration has remained stationary, not having spread, and has faded, it is the swelling from the burn. The priest shall pronounce them pure, for it is the scar of the burn. Now we're going to get one on the head or in the beard, and it is the same process. So isolation, and then coming back to examine in a week to see what's going on. If it hasn't spread, right, then the person is pure. And here if the skull has spread, the priest need not look for yellow hair. The person is. So this is the ongoing work of diagnosis of these conditions and the many different kinds of things that can be labeled or diagnosed as tzara'at. So when we talk about tzara'at, we're not talking about one thing. That's important to know. We're talking about lots of different things. The same way we might say, she has a virus. We're not talking about the same sickness for each person. We know that there are different viruses that result in different conditions. You might have a virus that gives you an upper respiratory infection. You might have a virus that lives in your intestines, which causes something quite different than a head cold, right? So what the symptoms are is going to depend on what kind of virus you have. That is the case with tzara'at. You might have tzara'at on the head or in the beard. You might have it in a burn. You might have it on the skin. And then there's a description of what happens when it's in someone's home, on the walls. So what that tells us is if you take something that looks like what happens on skin and it happens on the walls, then that too can be diagnosed as tzara'at, and it's tzara'at of the house. And then we have to deal with the house, right? The same way you deal with a person, it has to be returned to its normal state of purity. If it's on the walls, we can assume it looks something like mildew or some other kind of thing that's caused that looks flaky, the same way a scaly affection would look on the skin, right? I think sometimes about the shower head in hard water, you know, how it gets that scaly mineral, layer and deposit like that, it changed the metal. So something is actually going on. We know that it's the sediments in the water, but that's because we have the technology we have. But imagine in the ancient world, these things happen and it's like, wait, it doesn't matter really what caused it. What matters is you've got the condition, right? It's there. You can see it. And after 7 days, it hasn't resolved and spread. Okay. So all of these conditions are put under the term tzara'at. All of them require purification to return the person to a state of regularity, to a state of normalcy, and being part of the regular life ritually of the community. Presumably, if they were, they were working in the field, they didn't stop necessarily, depending on the tzara'at, depending on how intense the experience is. But there's other things they could go about normally, but other things they can't, because it will contaminate, it will spread the impurity through the camp. Okay. So what I want to pay some attention to is the fact that who was this reported to? If you had tzara'at, the priest. Okay. So this is not something that goes into a back alley to be dealt with. This goes right to the priest. This goes to the highest ritual authority in the community. The priest himself looks at the condition and decides whether or not this is tzara'at. If it is something that's suspicious and the person is isolated for 7 days, how do we check if the person is better? The priest goes to the person and looks and checks. When was the last time a doctor came to your house? Think about it. And I know it sounds like it's not such a big deal, but I think it really is. That the priest goes to the person It is communicating clearly to everyone that this is important enough for the priest to pay attention to. And it must be paid attention to by the priest. He can't just send somebody and say, draw it, and then I'll look at the drawing. The priest has to go look at the person, has to go look at the actual person, not just a description of the situation, like the actual physical description. Does that make sense? And there's many of our spiritual commentators call out how many times the word ra'ah, to see, is used. And it's over and over and over and over. The priest shall look, the priest shall see. And if the priest sees, when the priest looks, right? So that over and over and over and over, it's about the priest seeing. But when it uses the article, sees it, all of our spiritual teachers say, don't translate it as see it, translate it as see him, meaning the patient. When you look at him or her, right? It's not just the skin affliction, it's the person. You're looking at a person who's suffering from this condition. Okay.
And may I ask a question?
Sure.
I know you weren't there, but what about the concern of sacrificing the priest in case there was something that was potentially life-threatening?
So this is one of the ways we know that it was not life-threatening. First of all, it's assumed to get better. In any case, like even if it's tzara'at, it's going to get better, and then the person is purified. It is not fatal. There's no danger to the priest. And clearly, the Israelite cult did not fear the priest's contamination by tzara'at. Okay? So that's interesting. Like that's a PhD essay right there. So why wasn't there concern for the priest, right, and ritual impurity, contacting that from the person with tzara'at? But there is not a concern for that. This is not leprosy. We've had this conversation before. This is not leprosy. It's not Hansen's disease. That comes from a translation of the Septuagint from Greek. Using tzara'at, they translated into the Greek translation. They translated it leprosy. It is not Hansen's disease. All right. So we have these conditions that render one impure, in this case, tzara'at. But there are other conditions that render one impure. What are some of those? Do we remember?
Touching a dead body.
Touching a dead body. Mm-hmm. Childbirth, which we just saw, right?
One has a
night emissions for men.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Intercourse.
Oh, yeah.
Menstruation.
Right. So these are all things that disrupt the state of regularity and the state of purity. I want to spend a little time with Yitz Greenberg, whose opus work, I've mentioned him over the last couple of years a lot. His opus work is about his theory, his grand theory of Israelite tradition and rabbinic Judaism based in, the Israelite texts and practices and philosophy and theology. His main argument is that Judaism, starting with Israelite cult practice and way of looking at the world, is about affirming life without denying the existence, the reality, the experiences we have of death in life. And it doesn't mean just literal death. It's moments of death in life. And we all have them. He's suggesting that tum'ah and tahara, that purity and impurity, is about one's expected state of being in life and affirming life in all the ways that we can and should and do, to acknowledge when that is challenged by the presence of death and not just gloss over it. So I cannot tell you how many times I have counseled people who have lost someone. I've had to try to counsel them out of going back to work the next day. But I'm in the middle of a big project, Rabbi. We knew this was coming. She was 96, but I've already grieved her. She didn't even remember me anymore. So we have a tendency to want to get back to normal sometimes as soon as possible, because the disruption feels so alienating, disorienting, uncomfortable, right? What I admire, and I guess the older I get, the more this is true, I admire Yitz Greenberg's understanding and appreciation of the fact that our tradition does not ignore the losses and the fears and the close calls and the gratitude we have for making it through childbirth each time. We don't just gloss over that. It was taken very seriously, both by the temple system and later by the rabbis, who kept laws of purity and impurity present in the family, right? So that a woman is not available to her husband when she is menstruating and for 7 days after she stops bleeding. That continues to be the case in Orthodoxy, in Rabbinic Judaism. So this awareness stays with us. And I want to appreciate that we really get it wrong in our culture when we read these texts and assume that it's somehow about somebody being less than. It's really wrong. And the older I get, the more I understand that. It's about honoring the fact that we all confront death and the possibility of death. So the highest form of tum'ah, the highest form of ritual impurity, is contact with the death of a human who is the only creature living on the planet who can become impure. I never thought about that before till I studied Yitz Greenberg this time. That's why it's the highest form of tum'ah, because the dead body of somebody who could be rendered pure or impure, that's the highest form. So when it's dead and you contact it, it makes you the most impure than if you touch a frog that got squished on the side of the road. That's a lower level of impurity, right? So the higher the level of impurity does not in any way suggest that that you're lesser. It actually seems to suggest you're more, the more impure you render somebody. Is that making any sense? Lisa's going, no, it does not. Lisa Rosenbaum is saying, no, thank you, it does not. Rachel?
I keep coming back to this idea that for those kinds of ritual impurity, those kinds of dysregularity, anything that's really part of the human life cycle, whether it's intercourse, menstruation, childbirth, contact with a corpse, you're not required to remove the person from the camp. There's no concern that the impurity itself could spread throughout the camp and therefore make it impossible for God to be present among the people. As if there's an understanding among people that this crossing, this presence of death in life is a natural part of what we humans experience. Whereas when you have Ta'ara, with that thing, the affliction thing on fabric and the house and the skin, that it's as if it has crossed a boundary, creation, separation, there we go again. I'm now obsessed with that. Now I can't think of anything.
I love that.
It's your fault. That is somehow an unnatural crossing of a boundary. And so it's not that makes the person bad, or that it's somehow bad or sinful or evil. That's not what I'm saying. But that somehow could spread and contaminate in that it could somehow make the rest of the camp not fit for the divine to be present. And then back to what Alex was saying, because of course Alex raised an excellent point. Well, why is it okay for the priest then to be in contact with that person if this is a crossing over into, this death, this presence of this impure thing is contaminant is there? Well, then all of a sudden I thought that makes perfect sense, because that's exactly what the priest does all the time. The priest is the only one who's supposed to go into that liminal space and put himself right in the line of fire whether it's, bringing, the presence of God into the, into the Mishkan, whatever it is, like that's exactly, so I don't know that part isn't as fully formed yet, but it seemed like, I don't know, Alex made me feel like suddenly it actually made more sense that would be the priest, right? Like, actually, it has to be the priest. It can only be the priest. That's all I had to say. Why wouldn't you want to study this portion? Because it's skin disease
got a lot
is so
going
fascinating.
on. It's got a lot going on. Betsy?
I was wondering if an example of the sort of elevation of impurity that you're talking about, like it doesn't make you lesser than, in fact, the opposite, would be like in Hevra Kadisha, when they've got hands on the deceased, the corpse, because they're to wash the body. Isn't that kind of an elevation of they're impure because they're touching the corpse, but it's a very elevated position that they have of being the ones in charge of preparing the body for burial and washing.
Yeah, and that's how we know that impurity is not bad, because we're commanded to become impure, right? We wouldn't ever be commanded to do something that was understood to be bad.
Yeah.
You would be told never to do that. But to Rachel's point, it's understood to be a part of the everyday life of people, that we come into contact with situations that render us dysregular, and that is to be respected and addressed. Okay, Alex?
Yes, it gets me thinking about how really do we define impure? What does it connote? What does it denote? And I was thinking about COVID, of course, because this was my son's assigned Torah portion, in which you and the rest of the clergy so bravely continued to participate in. And there was some interesting parallels there, that we knew the worst consequences of COVID. We had a lot of misinformation about COVID. We didn't know it. At each juncture, we were given different information, and then finally came to understand ultimately how it was spread. But the priests, so to speak, or you and the clergy were really in the line of fire. You were at my son's, even though it was, postponed from April to the following November, there was no vaccines yet. We were wearing cloth masks, and you were in the line of fire, holding my son face to face with your hands in honor of his bar mitzvah. And there is something to be said about that. And that was a sacrifice, because what you're sharing here is that this impurity, even if it was leprosy, was there really an understanding of the implications of it? So it's very similar in a sense. Like, after watching the Motorcycle Diaries or reading the book, I saw, there wasn't a true understanding how leprosy was spread, but it became pretty clear of ways that one could avoid it. But still, these, healthcare workers, or I don't know, it's just interesting. Sorry, that's all.
Thank you for lifting that up, Alex. Thank you. And I got to tell you, there's a part of me, there must be something wrong with me, but there's a part of me that that was some of the most amazingly wonderful rabbinic work I've ever done. Like, you know what I mean? I guess I'm an intensity junkie. I don't know. But that was some of the most rewarding work I've ever done. Was, okay, we might get sick. Okay, we're not going to stop a bar mitzvah because we might get sick. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to explain, but it was like a dafka, we will do this. And there's a way that was so powerful that a regular Thursday afternoon just isn't. Okay. So I want to look a little bit at Yitz Greenberg. The board looked at me like I had 3 heads last night when I read some of this. Right, so let's go to the beginning. And I'll come down to through. Where's the word through? Okay, here we go. Through the opposing states of purity and impurity, the Torah, am I sharing? I'm not sharing. I was afraid of that.
Not yet.
Here we go. Now? Good? Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Through the opposing states of purity and impurity, the Torah points us toward both upholding life as well as dealing constructively with the inescapable but often shattering incursion of death into our lives. This guidance is the burden of our parsha. Leviticus teaches us to see that the forces of life and for quality of life are in binary opposition to the forces for death. The priest's role is to help people identify the life forces and work with them while identifying the forces of decay, dissolution, and death, and resisting them. Purity and impurity is the code of life and death, or better said, the code of life versus death. Life, especially in a state of vitality, is always pure. In fact, no living animal can contract impurity except for humans, right? Death, on the other hand, brings a condition of ritual impurity. All right, I want to go. This is a fascinating article, so I really recommend looking at it. But here. In all three types of impurity, the scenario is encounter with death. This is Yitz Greenberg's interpretation of the whole system, followed by withdrawal from the sacred, which represents life in all its intensity. These steps acknowledge the way that death or consciousness of death weighs on us and constricts our capacity to live. But this retreat, very much like the Shiva morning ritual to this day, tells us to limit our recoil. During the ritual period, we build up the energy to resume living. The sacrifice and immersion experience draws us into the realm of the sacred, reminding us that God and ritual are with us, spurring us on to re-engage in life. As devastating as death and loss of a loved one is in its impact, we are reassured that God and all the forces of the sacred are also powerful, and they are firmly on the side of life. They accompany us back into the work of expanding life in the world, that is, expanding the zone of holiness where life is growing and dominant. This individual experience of death and renewal of life brings us to the general worldview of Leviticus. There are two zones of living. The first is the sacred, which is all life. Jewish tradition teaches that if humans carry out their mission in partnership with God, someday the whole earth will be a zone of pure life. The other zone is the present state, the common, in Hebrew chol, where life and death are intermixed. In the interim, the sanctuary is an island of pure life in the midst of an unredeemed world where death is ever present. God is manifestly present in the sacred and the zone of pure life, but is also present in the common realm, although the divine presence there is obscured or hidden due to the presence of death. The collapse of meaning and the deep loss in death and in death encounter make it hard to feel God's presence or to recognize the underlying ocean of life and growth in which all of existence floats. Leviticus teaches us not to deny death or to try to evade it by distraction or immersion in work or pleasure. Rather, we act every day to increase life and to extend it through our activities. This is our part in humanity's long-term project to make this world, the common, into a holy realm where life is triumphant and increasing. However, when mortality inevitably comes in the form of death or its symbolic surrogates, such as wasting disease, like tzara'at, he's saying, we acknowledge it. We temporarily yield to it. Then, in partnership with the priests and the realm of the holy, we reaffirm life in ritual and in life behaviors. Thus, we do our share in the ongoing task of improving the mundane, increasing life's presence, and turning the mundane into the holy. I think what I'm appreciating about his view of Leviticus and the tradition is that it is a constant effort of bringing life more fully forward in every way possible and acknowledging when it's not possible because we're human and we are subject to certain things as human beings. I think that we could, as a culture, learn a lot, actually, from this worldview. That while we want to affirm life and purity and goodness and all of those things, we also need to acknowledge wasting and dissolving and ways that death intrudes on our experience. And it's not just death, like DED, dead now. It's things that are not as life affirming or that are threatening to life, that are scary, that are just different, right? Having intercourse with somebody, if you think about it, it's kind of weird. Think about it for a second. It's just weird, right? Like, it's not regular. that's not normal use of your body. It's just not. So, but it doesn't mean it's bad. It's not supposed to be bad. We don't understand it as bad, right? But it is other. It is different. It is a dysregulator from the normal. It's not making toast. Making love is not making toast. And the tradition acknowledges that. And I think we would do well to pay a bit more attention to when, in fact, we are bringing life forward in our daily existence and when we need to stop and acknowledge that this is not the time for that. We need to go ahead and acknowledge that something has interrupted that normal pursuit of life and, as Rachel would say, separation and all the things that bring growth and fruition and all of that we need to stop. There's pruning involved in growth. There's loss and right. There's a time you don't pick fruit from tree. Like there's stoppage and cessation and cutting stuff off, as well as planting and nourishing and eating from the growth. And I guess I'm just appreciating, maybe again, because as I get older, that's really what this is about. And that I'm not saying we need to appreciate that this is the way we need to do it. I'm not saying that. I'm saying I wish we had a little more awareness and more language and more respect and appreciation for these phases of regularity and dysregularity than we do, right? Like when I move out of this house and into my own place, I wish there were some kind of massive ritual to mark the fact that I am coming out of some massive disorientation by not having my own space as a 61-year-old woman. There's no ritual for that. There's no marking of that. I mean, I'm gonna make one, obviously, because you know who I am. But what I'm saying is we live in these states of dislocation and dysregularity, and we don't honor them nearly enough, I don't think, in our culture. Whether it's somebody getting better from a diagnosis that they've gotten, whether somebody is now in remission, whether it turned out to be cancer, yes, but it's stage 0. Okay. Whatever we just don't do a very good job. We don't have a fluency with our way of talking about it and or acknowledging these different states in our lives, I don't think. All right, Alex, then Betsy.
So much to say, but going from where you just landed, which is, it is really, I always thought it was interesting that after COVID, I mean, that was so seismic on every level, and that it was in some ways, all of a sudden we were expected to go back to normal. And whether it was work, relationship, being in relationship with people, being in person. And I thought it was fascinating that there wasn't like a week of reflection or something, maybe that's what prayer and meditation is really for, because we don't have some sort of container of let's process what's happened on a granular level, individual level, and in the meta. And then speaking of meta, I'm curious, why do you think, why this portion now in the placement? What do you, in sort of the meta placement of all of the books of Torah? Why this? Why now?
Okay. So Mary Douglas has a piece about Leviticus as the book of Leviticus as the body. So she would argue this is placed here in sequence given where we are in the body that is Leviticus. Now you're going to have to do some research because I don't know exactly this one, but I know her theory is that these parshiot are placed like this because Leviticus itself is organized like a body that's sacrificed, and the way it's stacked on the altar, as well as the Mishkan, how it's constructed, and how the Mishkan is laid on top of the human body. So it's fascinating. It's really, really interesting. Betsy?
I agree with you that we are definitely lacking in some sort of recognition of all these changes, and we don't have a way to mark, like you're transitioning and moving from this temporary abode to your house. And I think that's one place where the Orthodox have it over us, because my son just made a surprise 24-hour visit. And I see that he, says blessings all day long over every little thing. And I'm thinking, well, it does, that they have a way of marking all these transitions and changes and giving thanks for everything good that happens and even blessings over things that are not so good. There's just, we just don't have that in our society, but they really have it over us in that respect anyways.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. And the rabbinic tradition says, that we have to say 100 blessings a day and that you're not allowed to take God's name in vain. So you can't say a bracha that's not actually a bracha. In other words, you can't say, oh, I'm going to say Shechianu over reading Yitz Greenberg's article for the first time. It has to be for real, which means, Bert would say, that you have to cultivate an attitude of looking for things to say a bracha over, because you got to get up to 100. And you can't make one for nothing. That's taking God's name in vain. So what does that mean? And of course, it's tongue in cheek when they say that, but I think they're making a philosophical point, right? That try to find 100 things to affirm today. And for Yitz Greenberg and his language, he says, we do not accept the common, meaning the regular world, the secular world, as fixed and unchangeable. Rather, we embrace the mundane and participate in it while all the time moving it toward the realm of the sacred. So in other words, eating can either just be eating, which is mundane, or like Betsy saying, her son will sit and as he looks at his plate, as he eats each food, he will say a bracha over each food. Right. Because one is Borei Pri Adama, one is Borei Pri Ha'etz, one is Shehakol. Every time you take a bite of a food, your first bite at that meal of that food, you say a bracha over, did it come from the ground? Blessed are you, God, who makes the fruit of the tree. Blessed are you, God, who makes everything, meaning you can't recognize where the heck it comes from because it's oatmeal. And who knows where that comes from? So that's Shehakol. So that cultivates a sense of, oh, right. It's not just lunch. It's, oh, there's fruit here. Let me express, right, gratitude and wonder at the miracle that fruit grows on trees. Let me express gratitude for the fact that things grow under the ground, right? And, and on and on and on and on and on. And so it's cultivating an attitude that I think is a healthier one if what we want is to be aware of the sacred and life in every possible moment. Lori.
I know since I'm a newbie to this group, this is probably something that has been discussed, but what struck me right at the beginning is the idea that people in their normal, as you said, state are pure, like as opposed to Christianity where you are born into impurity and you have to spend your life becoming pure, that in our natural normal state we're pure. Things happen in life to impurify us, and then we get back to our normal state. And I thought that was very powerful.
I think that is true. So however many times we reiterate it, I think it's worth reiterating, is that first Israelite, then Jewish tradition understands us to be primarily good and created pure and in the image of the divine. Correct. So when we compare with Christianity, though, we have to be careful to use the right language. For them, it's not that we're born impure, it's that we're born into original sin. So there is a stain, an existential stain on each of us that only Jesus as the Christ can rectify. Okay, so let's just be clear about that. So pure and impure is a different kind of thing. And I appreciate your comment, which is, it's interesting that even as far back as Israelite religion, it was understood that we're primarily pure. And then things, come along that disrupt that. And then we have to go back to being pure, but that is the default setting, if you will. I very much appreciate that about our tradition.
Is there another terminology that can be used instead of pure and impure? Because I understand that it relates to the temple and ritual and when you're able to do certain rituals, but it kind of doesn't work in our life today, this sense of purity and impurity. It smacks as something negative and pejorative.
Which is why I often use regular and dysregular. like to be dysregulated.
Yeah.
Right? That regular isn't fabulous. It just is regular.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it just doesn't have the same connotations, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's great.
Bert?
I wanted to add to what I thought was your wonderful point about the blessings and the systems of blessings. And it's, it's one thing, I mean, you're supposed to say 100 blessings a day. But if you can't say 100 blessings a day, you should at least say one blessing, or two blessings, or three blessings, because it's a consciousness-raising situation. And I think too often we limit our blessings just to what we call religious moments, Friday nights, blessing the children. And part of the function of blessings is to find holiness in the mundane and to create to create a sense of who am I and how do I fit in with all this? And, what am I? There's that story about I forget I think it's in the Talmud about the rabbi with two pieces of paper in his pocket, one which says I'm nothing and the other which says the world was created for me, and somewhere in between that. So I think this is where progressive Judaism, quite frankly, falls down, and that is the blessings tend to be, let's find some kind of a new ritual somewhere on top of a mountain or whatever it is, as opposed to what you were saying, one blessing before I eat, or one blessing after I eat, or one blessing when I see the ocean. I used to have a practice that no longer because I don't live there anymore, in the Palisades, when I come through the McClure Tunnel, of saying the blessing for seeing the sea. And it's amazing how many things that people can build into their lives. And it requires a bit of discipline, and it requires starting somewhere, starting with one or maybe two, or making a commitment,
Well, that's a beautiful articulation of Yitz Greenberg's philosophy about what this is all about. That I'm just a friendly amendment. It's not what am I and what is my relationship to all this. It's I am a reflection of God. I am holy. I am pure. I am a living, thinking, feeling creature. And I uniquely have the capacity to understand that and to be grateful for that, so that there's a bracha for waking up and your eyes open and your brain comes online. There's a bracha for that, right? So I just want to flip it a little bit from what am I, who am I, to say I am a holy being. I have the capacity to bless God. Mm-hmm. And then I'm invited to do that and increase my awareness of that. And like you said, and like Yitz says, we call him Yitz. Like, why do we do that? Like, why do we do that? We who are his students, love him so much. It's but we call him Yitz rather than Rabbi Greenberg. So, what he suggested, right, is that all those moments are potential moments of affirming life in the mundane, and that we're trying to cultivate that awareness, because that leads to a more fulfilling life, right? That leads to a more, right. Betsy just said there's a blessing for after going to the bathroom. Absolutely. Because any of you who have had any issues with that ever know that it's the worst, right? But we usually take for granted that it all works. And our tradition says don't say a blessing when it works, because that's big, huge. That's amazing. Right, Pam?
I wanted to say that our morning prayers include Elohai Neshama, that the soul you've given me is pure. Just wanted to bring that up, that we affirm that every morning.
We affirm every morning, Elohai Neshama shenatata bi tehorahi. God, the soul that you have given me is pure, right? You put it in me and you'll take it from me when it's my time, right? It is lent to us. Tamara.
Thanks. I just also wanted to add the part that we were saying earlier, which is about honoring the part that death is a part of life and giving ourselves space to honor the death in our everyday life. As it's our job to choose life in everything we do. I loved this part, and I liked how we got from a parsha on leprosy. That's what it seemed to be about, right? To just really respect how we honor and give space for that which is not common, or the death in our life. Just beautiful, all of it. honoring the life and honoring the death.
Nice.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you.
And actually, now that you say it, I think it's one of the biggest challenges of my work. Is truly, it is one of the biggest challenges of my work is that there are so many moments in a day that are about death and the way that it intrudes on our ability to just be in the moment, right? There are 3 phone calls I need to make after Torah study to people who are struggling with very, very serious diagnoses. They're in different stages of diagnosis right now. And it makes me aware that if we tended to it a little more, those people would feel less lonely because we're terrible, at doing it as a culture. And so people wind up being really lonely and in it, like in those circumstances, very aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday Morning Torah Study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.